buenas tardes y bienvenidos nuevamente
Very
a
good
esta
afternoon.
jornada.
Once again, welcome to this day of seminars. We have asked for you to join us in a round of applause for our panelists and for our speakers, but give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for all of you who are with us now, who have been with us from the very first day. Thank you very much for coming here to enjoy this widespread of information and knowledge that is shared with you. Now we're going to discuss the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean, especially understanding how important of a role it plays in the development we want for our countries. Today we have clients and representatives of IDB Invest. That is the IDB Group entity responsible for creating projects and bringing capital to the private sector in our regions. We also have clients and representatives of IDB Lab, which is the innovation laboratory at the IDB Group. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for always being by our side. Now, I'm more than certain that the next two panels, this last set of segments for the day, are going to be something that we get a lot out of. We're going to begin with the first segment of our last seminar, originate-to-share. I'd like to first introduce you to Rachel Roboy, who is the Chief Risk Officer at IDB Invest, and the rest of the panelists, and ask you all to join us on stage.
Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and good afternoon. I am Rachel Roboy, the CRO of IDB Invest, and I want to welcome you to the private investment panel, where we'll be talking about how our new business model, originate-to-share, can make a difference to attract impact investors in our region. We must appreciate how the world has changed since 2016, when IDB Invest was first created. Today's challenges are completely different, are more complex, and to address them, we need to rethink how to solve them. So that's why IDB Group developed a new vision and a new model for IDB Invest. We've focused on becoming a bridge between development gaps in the region and investors, becoming the first MDB to transition towards what we're calling the originate-to-share business model. This new framework places mobilization and development impact at the center of all of our investment decisions, ensuring that we're crowding in private investors at scale, and we want this to happen at inception of a project and throughout the life of the projects. Our new vision incorporates insights and also recommendations from a lot of global discussions about development bank reforms, encouraging MDBs to optimize capital, to innovate on products, and to crowd in the private sector. In our discussion today, we'll begin to unpack how our new model helps us accelerate investment and impact in our region. As we know, the emergence of sustainable finance remains largely untapped, and we're going to look to continue to tap that together. All the knowledge that we've gained creating products such as B-bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, and blended finance are continuing to grow that help us to solve the needs and to continue to attract investors. I have the pleasure today to introduce to 4 panelists bringing expertise on private sector investment in developing markets. And I'm pleased to call these panelists partners of IDB Invest. So I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. Marta Perez from Allianz, Rodrigo Jimenez Alfaro from SACIR, John Greger from Blue Orchard, and Julian Mayer from JMMB. Thanks to each of you for joining us today on the panel. I'd like to begin with a question for Rodrigo. SACIR has been a great partner of IDB Invest over the years. Together, we've done a variety of emblematic projects in the region. We've done the Rumichaca-Pasto toll road, the Pamplona-Cúcuta toll road in Colombia. We've done the Ruta 27 project in Paraguay. We've done the Ferrocarril Central project in Uruguay. Can you tell us about the elements beyond the financial components that make you choose to work with an MDB such as IDB Invest?
Bueno, primero, daros las gracias.
Well, let me begin by thanking you for having me on this panel. I am very pleased to spend this time with you. Now, on the question, IDB as a multilateral offers a lot more than just financing. The first thing is that the IDB also reviews projects like we do, and when it chooses a project, we know that it is exactly the kind of project that we tend to also choose, and one that is going to add a lot of value to where we're going to implement it, and also meets a set of requirements, and that's one first stage. The other thing we tend to see is that in regions where there is not a concessional framework that is as well developed, where things are as sophisticated, the IDB helps us take on these challenges. Just a few moments ago, you were talking about Ruta 27. We were able to carry out that project and get approval from our investing committee thanks to the fact that the IDB Group, at the time the offer was placed, that bid gave us a guarantee of 50%. That's where we're able to get approval. We also have other examples. You talked about Ferrocarril Central, and that is a slightly more sophisticated structure that we're used to because there are a few tranches and bonds and banknotes, but there were different players, and that meant that the local funders had to also work with their national funders, and the IDB was able to help us make that connection and get to that international standard. And Colombia is something that I'm reminded of too. It seems to have always been a great success, but it wasn't necessarily the case. In the beginning, we were first starting to close on a number of aspects of the project. In Maduro, for example, local banks did not want to support those projects, but the MDBs were there and were able to close the first set of deals and bring in more investors to get the 5G component off the ground. So you can see that there are different examples, but I think that this is really important, and this is why I'm mentioning this last. It's really important to see the role you play in being that middle person, that intermediary between the different clients. And through that facilitation, you help to structure the projects the right way and strike that balance with the risks and finding ways to implement it better. But during that implementation, you also play a key role, because when we turn to our clients, they tend to think that all we want is more money. Now, there is an aspect of it that is true, but it is not the whole truth. And so having you by our side as you explain the situation and how to make sure that this project continues, that's vital. And so the way I see it, in addition to the financing, which we do need, all of those other aspects are the reasons why we need to continue working with the IDB.
Appreciate what you said about early involvement helps you and gives you the confidence to continue forward and your involvement in transactions. And I also fully align with what you say about problem solving. I always say that sometimes our assets are like children. They have their ups and downs and they need our love and attention. And so I really appreciate that, and I have a note on that. I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I'd like to turn to Marta now, and since doing your first transaction with IDB Invest in 2018 for a renewable energy project in Uruguay, we're thrilled that Allianz has grown to be one of our strongest partners in the region. And more recently, Allianz came into the Ferrocarril transaction that Rodrigo just talked about for a significant ticket size. Would you walk us through what drives your investment decisions when partnering with an MDB? And particularly, what role does de-risking play in that decision-making process?
Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, IDB, for having me here today. It's been a journey since 2018. I think that transaction was our second transaction in Latin America. The first one had been Mexico, but Mexico at that point was considered to be an extension of the US, so it didn't really count. So just to give you a little bit of a background, so when you think about Allianz Global Investors back in 2018, I think we have around like $17 billion of assets under management. All our investments were done in very well-developed countries. And when I say well-developed, it's like Germany, France, the US. I think we have a couple in Spain, which was considered to be the exotic ones. So for us to enter into Latin America, it was a very foreign territory. And we had to do it with the IDB. I mean, I think at that point, and you still are, we're the leading lender in the region. So when you don't really know a new market, you have to go, whole hand to the one that actually does. And since then, 5 years, fast forward, I think we have $3 billion of assets under management in Latin America. We have invested in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Uruguay, and next week we will be closing our first transaction in Brazil. And IDB play a big role, not only just to help us with the first one, to teach us how to do business in the region, but we have collaborated in many occasions. And that collaboration goes in different ways. I mean, sometimes it's under the AB bond structure, as we did in Ferrocarril. Sometimes it's because the IDB is another lender along us. I would say the risking come in different type of ways. We always say when the IDB is there, we have the halo effect. So for most lenders, you would think, oh, IDB is here, nothing is going to happen to us, we're going to be really protected, there is no way any government will ever terminate a contract or a concession as long as the IDB is there, which is true, and I totally believe that, and I'm sure you agree with me. But I think it goes farther than that, and I think I was mentioning to you, I've been working with the IDB for many years now, even before I joined Allianz, and I was one of the, there are not many deals in Latin America that actually default, because structures tend to be much tighter. We work longer in the transactions to make sure that they are very robust. But unfortunately, I was part of one of those deals that had a major issue with a local community. IDB was one of the lenders, and I was able to see not only that you have access to the right people, and you will be helping us through a process of restructuring, but also the large amount of resources that you would deploy to a transaction like that. And it's not just the people, because banks or institutional investors, we do not have those type of resources, but it's the expertise. I mean, you were able to help us on the remediation plan, you were helping with the restructuring. So to me, the risking is not just only that transactions are able to achieve sometimes a higher rating just because the IDB is there. That helps our investors, obviously, with their cost of capital. But there is a very large umbrella that comes with the IDB being part of us.
I appreciate your comments, and I think that your example, when there are issues, it's thinking about how we can solve them. So how you say we hold hands and we really do it as a team, and bring everybody in as we work to problem solve. And I also appreciate what you're commenting about building relationships. So it's not only relationships with the shareholders and the lenders, but also on the ground. And it's not just all the government entities that we need when we're doing this type of infrastructure project, but it's building relationships, also the trust of the communities. And I think that's something that we do as an ecosystem and really see our roll through, not just ex ante at the approval and the closing, but through the cycle of these transactions. I'm going to turn to Julian. Julian, JMMB is one of the leading financial groups in the Caribbean, and one of JMMB's main strengths is your ability to raise funding for your clients. When it came time to raise your own funding, you chose to partner with IDB Invest. We closed our A loan together in 2020, and then we raised a $31 million syndicated loan in 2021. So first we closed for ourselves, and then we went out to the market to find additional funding. Can you share with us what drove your decision to partner with an MDB, and in particular to partner with IDB Invest? And tell us what you were trying to achieve in your financing goals.
Sure. Well, being expected to provide funding solutions and access to finance for institutions or sovereigns throughout the region, we know one of the most important things is capability to execute. And we've had a long-standing relationship with IDB, and we've had other relationships with other MDBs that on a smaller scale. We found comfort in that the execution capability wasn't questionable. We were confident that you guys would be able to get there, and therefore we felt firstly comfortable that we were at the right place to start the process, meaning we're working with people that could end it and complete the process. And that's the first important trigger for our choosing to work with you. The other side of it, or another component that was extremely important, is that in these markets that we operate within, on the ground in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Dominican Republic, and yeah, we're very proud of being here. I'm very proud of the role that we've played in building and developing markets across the region. But in these smaller markets, there is a level of, they are island states ultimately, right? And when we think about risk, one of the principles of diversity, of diminishing and managing risk, really comes down to diversification. And a lot of us think about it only on the component of the asset side. So we think about, I need to have a diversified portfolio, it's going to give me proper diversification. But when you're sitting in economies that are the size of any one of these territories, there's a high level of correlation. So we can diversify by industry. We can diversify in a number of other ways, structures and whatever else, and asset classes. But it becomes equally important to diversify on the liability side because of the depth of the markets or the lack thereof. And your funding is uncorrelated risk. So right now, right now is a perfect time. We just came out of COVID. Everybody's talking about inflation being this beast that may hurt us in so many territories. So we have monetary policy tightening, active in Jamaica, active in Dominican Republic. Both of them are open markets in the region. And therefore, institutions such as ourselves and other FIs are going to be experiencing much the same thing at the same time. So when we think about refinancing risk and a number of other, and any other consideration that we may view as being potentially market disturbances that we wouldn't want to face at the time of a refinancing, when it comes to material financing, we do want to see diversification. We do want to see that there's a level of uncorrelation, and therefore we can diminish the extent to which a refinancing becomes an actual liquidity risk. So that was also an important component. We also would have looked on what the relationship means. So we would have had a full discussion with you and your team about what we'd be rolling out, the fact that we'd also be looking to do, tranches for distribution to a broader universe. And we accepted that going through this process, and it was assumed from the start it would be a painful, intrusive one. And it was less painful, but certainly intrusive nonetheless. So we would have gone through all of that with the understanding that on the other side of it, we would have benefited from getting, I guess, to even know ourselves better, because we were evaluating even our own portfolios by metrics that we wouldn't have before. But also ensuring that others got to know us better. And in that exercise, we would have had participation from, Blue Orchid and others who would have joined in and had a reason to take an exposure in Jamaica and specifically for the Jamaican bank, and in a Caribbean entity within the financial sector. Being players as we've always been in the securities dealing industry, we're very well aware that when people think about taking exposure in the region, they typically think sovereign only. And they think along the lines of who are your serial borrowers. So you have a reason to go and spend the time in a research department, getting to understand Jamaica, getting to understand Dominican Republic. But to go deeper than that and think about the actual industries operating within the countries, that is a slightly longer stretch. And as one of those industries, the financial sector, and a player in there, this relationship would have brought about international investors getting to understand a local player in the financial system. And that is invaluable to us. We know what we do, and we do tick the boxes of development. It's a fundamental theme of ours. So we didn't have any questions as to if we would satisfy your criteria. But we also would have never exposed that type of investment thesis and the way that we operate to the rest of the world if it weren't through collaborating, with IDB Invest. So we're happy to do it, and we're here a few years in, and happy to be sitting on the floor here and talking with the rest of your team.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's interesting to hear you talk about the first, when you looked at the thesis for, why IDB Invest, it began with, okay, the diversification. And as you worked with us, you mentioned trust, also relationship, and also delivery. And so when we talk about the word partner, it's fantastic to hear how that all came together. And that's really important to us. And also for a first-time client to hear the confidence that you had, not only could we deliver, but our commitment in the region, and also for us really to show that partnership, because it gives confidence to others that we're going to continue to play a role in the region with an important player as yourselves. And you mentioned also Jan, so let's bring in Blue Orchid. So Blue Orchid and John, they've been partners with IDB Invest since 2010. We worked on our first project together back in 2010. We did a microfinance project together in Peru, and have since done several transactions together, and we've invested in a fund together. But before we talk about the fund that we've invested in together, let's talk a little bit more about, if you could walk us through your decision process into becoming involved in the JMMB transaction. Had you ever done a deal before in Jamaica? And why did you choose this particular deal?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and also thanks for having us and here at this opportunity. So yeah, indeed. So in Blue Orchid, we work in Latin America. I think it was the first region where microfinance really was important and developed. And so alongside Blue Orchid too, and we have a physical presence in Lima since 2007. With a large team. There are like about 15 colleagues there, in Lima working on Latin America. We have invested since about 3.5 billion or so in the region, across many institutions. So when you talk about, these projects are like children, I can really relate to that, because it's, really we have a lot of different projects that we have to look at in the same time how they develop. And one key element is that, and you mentioned this, is really this diversification element, and it's really about risk management within a portfolio that has a strong regional component on one side, but is also a global portfolio at the other side, which are most of the funds that we do manage. And so diversification is a key element, and this diversification also has a country dimension. And so when there's an opportunity in countries where we are not yet present, like Jamaica, like could be other countries, then that it's really interesting for us to engage. And it helps us, again, in this diversification, and the fact that the IDB Invest has looked into this, and you described the process, how you learn more about your own organization through the due diligence. So, that is really something that gives us also comfort. When we underwrite such deals, we look at, what is the quality of your work that you've already been doing. And over the years, we got really comfortable in working with IDB Invest because we really know, sort of the quality of underwriting that you do. And I think another element is then over time, these sorts of investments, if you think from an international or private investor perspective, there's a lot of risk perception when it comes to certain regions. Now, specifically the Caribbean, there's a lot of perception, and you mentioned, people like to go into sovereign. Yeah. There's a lot of risk perception. And so one way how to work on that is really over time building a track record of successful transactions. And really then being able to build that track record together, I think will help us also in over time changing that perception, because ultimately we will have data to show that transactions are successful, and being successful, we're able to change this perception, right? So I think that is where another element comes into this sort of decision, is when we say, let us build together that track record of transactions that can change the view that markets have on some of our countries and regions.
That's amazing, because I think you both mentioned diversification, which is very important, and you found a good match in that. The other thing about this particular partnership is that when Blue Orchard came in, it wasn't just to take part of a B loan, but it actually purchased a piece of IDB Invest early exposure. And so this is really an early example of originate-to-share, where we can bring to the market very good assets and also introduce new players. So it wasn't the region you didn't know. Maybe you hadn't been to Jamaica before, but $3.5 billion in Latin America. And also, so I really think that partnership and early evidence of our model truly working, and that's exciting to see. We've talked a little bit about the different products that we've worked on together with each of you. I want to bring that product examples and really incorporate that into a conversation about impact, because that's part of our new business model, is originate to share for more impact. And I want to go back to Rodrigo, because two of the transactions we worked on together are social bonds. Can you talk to us a little bit? Why did you decide to use the social bond product? And tell us about the benefits that you saw in doing that in terms of your financing options.
Bueno.
Before I speak about the social bond, I should explain that we were able to work with a social bond because of the way we developed the project and putting in place the features required for a social bond. And this is important because SACIDA's strategy is to have projects that add value in a manner that is sustainable and that is also respectful of the environment to the extent possible. And we do that because it's the only way we think we can continue to be a profitable company and at the same time be sustainable in the long run. So that's how we issued our first social bond and the others you've mentioned. And that helped us, and it had a positive impact for a series of reasons. One, because we were able to show the market that what we say and what our strategy stands for is not just what we say, but rather we had rating agencies saying, yes, this company is doing things right. It is meeting all the criteria for a social bond, and that was significant. Another positive example is that other investors like Marta, well, unfortunately, it did not bring the price down, but they were more eager to participate in the project. So it's not just about pricing. It's also important to have investors who can relate to the project and are interested in participating. And this takes me back to your previous question. You asked me, what can the IDB contribute in addition to financing? Well, the IDB has a lot to contribute to us because our strategy is adding value to society in a manner that is sustainable and that also meets environmental criteria. So that's what we do and will continue to do. And having a partner like the IDB and other investors as well enables us to continue to do this kind of work and not just base our choices on pricing. We have two clients, actually, the end user and management. So they need to see our contribution and also are ready to support us long term. And that's better than our competitors because they base their choices on pricing exclusively.
For all of us in terms of what the region can move towards in terms of product development on sustainability, and I think those transactions are true evidence of that. I want to continue with the sustainability and focus on impact. We've already talked about the role of de-risking to attract institutional investors in transactions into our region. And sustainability has also become a key investment consideration for institutional investors. We know that Allianz is one of the founding members of the Net Zero Owners Alliance. Tell us more about this alliance, and tell us about how does it mean you choose transactions and source your deals.
Yes, so I think Allianz was one of the founders back in 2019. I think since then there is 88 members, $9.5 trillion of assets. So it's been a long way. I think for Allianz, this was very important. We kind of saw how the business practices disregarded societal and environmental impacts on the society. And they wanted to change and have a more standardized business practices, and same thing for reporting. And there is something that you cannot do alone. So they had to be part of this joint community. For us, sustainability, ESG, has become very key on the selection of our transactions. And I would say it goes equally with pricing or risk profile. As we evaluate, and we have Rodrigo bringing us a transaction, we would just look at the risk profile. We will look at the pricing just to see if this is something that will work for him, will work for us. But then we'd also look how that asset fits within our sustainability guidelines. And it is a very detailed process, and we have to go through different things and just make sure that it fits. And if it doesn't, that means that we cannot do it. And I think Rodrigo knows that because we were a couple of years ago working together on a transaction which was fantastic from a risk profile perspective. It was fantastic from a return perspective. Maybe I shouldn't say that in front of him. But everything checked except, it just didn't meet our net zero policy. And fortunately for us, when you work with companies like Zephyr, companies where sustainability is key for them, they understand that. And then, we were able to sit down together and be like, okay, what can we do? I want to do the transaction. These are my limitations. And we figured it out. And I think we need is a joint effort. It cannot just be a lender saying, these are my new standards. It cannot be the administration. It has to be all of us together that, we figure out how to get there. And for us, the net zero policy is not something that we just have on our website as an advertisement. I can tell you we spend a lot of time on that. Right now, I would say it's almost 50% on credit discussing with the investment committee. The other 50% is discussing with the sustainability committee.
Actually, truly music to my ears, because I'm a big proponent of analysis of actually non-financial risks that become credit risks. And I'm not sure that everybody spends the sufficient amount of time in those non-financial risks and the sustainability, both opportunities and risks. So I think we're well aligned on that. The other comment that you made is about reporting. And there's so much reporting that we need to do, all of us, whether it be on compliance, on sustainability, on impact. And I think in the future, that's one area that I think, I'd love to continue to have that conversation, because I think the complexity of different reporting standards makes for more reporting probably for all of you. So I don't know if you have any feedback on that.
Yeah, I would say something there, because when we work with large corporations like Zephyr, they have their own sustainability teams. They know exactly what we need in terms of reporting, and it's very easy. I think at this point every party understands what they need to do. But in Latin America, when we work with the smaller developers, sometimes that's a deal breaker for us when we say this is the requirements, the reporting requirements we are going to have to have every year, or even some of the information that we request just at the beginning in order to evaluate a transaction. They don't know how to they have the information, they just don't know how to provide it to us. And I think for an institution like the IDB, where and I think going back to what Rodrigo said, it's not just you bring financing or you bring the availability to finance a project. There is a lot of knowledge that you bring to the borrowers. So I think in terms of reporting and in terms of sustainability and the standards, that's something where I think the IDB can play a key role for those smaller companies, those smaller developers that they want to access the capital markets, but they are not able to because they just don't have the required tools to do so. And right now, for companies like mine, we can't, it is a complete deal breaker.
Thanks for that. It's labor intensive, and also sometimes I think a labor of love, and part of our additionality in terms of helping clients bring them up to the international best practices in terms of reporting. So that's something to take away with us. I want to go to Julian now. As a financial institution that operates in the Caribbean, can you tell us some things that JMMB is doing to create impact in your interventions with your clients?
Sure. So we have always, had a strong ethos that a strong environment is good for business, and we've worked very diligently over the years to go and target areas where we've had weaknesses or we felt needed to be served to overall strengthen the economies in which we operate. Since starting our relationship with you guys, we really had to spend a lot of time. So I'm listening to the reporting questions, and honestly, I laugh about it because, in our loan management systems and so forth, there was never a field to say, okay, who owns this company? What's their agenda? Who owns the company? Sure. But we're not sorting by names, we're sorting by gender, and that wasn't necessarily a critical component. Now, as a result of how we have to report to you, and this is now how we internally also report and understand our impact, we're capturing the genders, we're capturing default rates related to, we're capturing size of transactions with particular agendas. We're doing all of that, and what we realized, and within certain segments, of course, in SMEs, we got very deliberate with ensuring that now that we're going to be paying so much attention in such a deliberate way to doing this and measuring it, we're going to ensure that we do it even more effectively than we would have done before. So we developed SME centers, resource centers in each country. So we have one in Jamaica, we have one in DR, we have one in Trinidad. And you can go on our website, you see it's access to everybody. I mean, none of you qualify, but you can tell whoever, right? And people are able to get on there and get the sort of personal interaction and guidance that changes the types of credit we end up looking at. So a lot of the SMEs in our countries, which are education-wise and capital-wise, there are deficiencies. We know that we have to help. So we help with writing business plans. We help with preparing your financial statements. We help with mentoring. We do all of this, and we may not even get that person as a client. They may ultimately choose a different bank. It's not tied. There's no correlation between the two. We're just running these centers as centers for development, and we do have a strong focus also on women, which we have, it goes on this name, powerful, right? Interventions that are targeted on the woman, and their specific needs, and it runs all of these same trainings around money management, all the things that would be typically important to a female entrepreneur or a head of family, which so often happens to be women. So we're now running these centers that are creating a better universe for us to actually fund, and we're pushing out, of course, the funding for those who choose to work with us on that. And we're finding, a great response. I'll say that, we've had an increase, now we're measuring it, in the numbers of loans being provided to women. We also see that the dollar figure that we disperse to women, not because we have anything against men, but it just happens to be more per individual transaction, and their default rates are significantly inside that typical to males. So we're doing those initiatives, but we of course also are in a less, I guess you won't find this on the website, but we're also, of course, getting out there and having these very detailed and deliberate discussions with all the rest of businesses as well, to try and encourage them to show to us how it is that their own activities align with what it is that we care about with regard to the ESG types of goals. So we're forcing them to look deeper within themselves to see how they can also make an impact. And to the extent that that helps them, when discussing with us a funding transaction, then there's a healthy synergy and as a result of it. So
Thanks.
That's what we've been up to.
I appreciate it, and I've seen firsthand, I think, your commitment to building the female asset class, and I want to applaud you for that. I want to turn to John. So not only have we partnered on transactions, we've now invested in your Gender Lens Fund. And I want to talk to you, if you were to give us some advice, as IDB Invest embarks on its originate-to-share business model, how do you see firms such as Blue Orchard scaling up your own activities to accompany us on this venture?
Yeah, sure. And so the fund, so that the Gender Lens strategy you mentioned is really a good example, because it's one of these strategies where we have what is called blended finance structure. So there's an investment that works through a structure where you have investors from the public side, such as the IDB. And then you have private investors that join together and then, invest together in a particular region, particular topic. And so here, this strategy is built on the idea of a regional focus, so Latin America, Caribbean focus, but additionally, it has this idea of fostering, inclusion of women-led companies in the portfolios, and you mentioned that, that how many financial institutions are getting on that journey, but it's also, fostering inclusion more generally of other minorities, that have access to finance in the same way, as a majority, and so. This is a topic which is, I think, for anybody that has experience or lived in Latin America, that's something which is sort of the day-to-day experience. There is still exclusion happening, and from basic services such as financial services. And so for us, that strategy therefore made a lot of sense. However, now, if we want to bring in private investors in such strategies, so really, and that comes the point of scalability, no? Because really the private investment is going to be needed for this scalability. We need to have structures where, part of the risk, and here again we come to the point of risk perception, but part of the risk is been taken over by public entities. And if that is a structure then that works, actually it can be really successful. And this strategy, it's been not even a year, it's at about 100 million or so in commitments, so it's also developed really nicely. And so it's a good example of how we can really make that work. So stepping in with sort of a seed capital for strategies like this, and on that basis then getting into private investors. So then really you have this public-private partnership working for a specific goal. And here it's really about, again, inclusion of women-led companies. There's a lot of challenges we have in terms of reporting, the available data, and you mentioned all the topics, so I'm not going to repeat. But what's really here important is that the fund has mobilized an additional facility that is called technical assistance. And what's the idea with that is to say, okay, we know that different companies are on different stages, let's say in their gender and diversity journey in a way, and some are really advanced, some are sort of beginning, and so to support the companies in that development, that is an additional investment, and therefore these technical assistance facilities, they make a lot of sense, because you have the need not only to work on the outreach, so really we get to finance companies led by women, but also we get to, talk to the company about their own sort of diversity, internally in the company, and we get to talk about the reporting. And you mentioned the reporting too, without the reporting, we can't really, go out, talk to private investors and say, this is a gender-focused investment if we don't have the reporting to back that up. So that is really key, and therefore working with you guys and other companies on that reporting is so important.
And you mentioned leverage, and I think, when we talk about our new business model, interesting feedback about how we have to have the confidence to be an early first mover and how you're able to leverage that confidence with other investors. So at actually risk of extending ourselves, I'm going to challenge each of you for the speed round. And the speed round, I'd like each of you to provide closing remarks. And in your closing, I'd ask you to incorporate either lessons learned or any recommendations for IDB Invest as we work, one, to scale up, and two, on our originate-to-share business model. Tell us your advice. Let's start with Rodrigo.
Bueno.
Well, I would ask you to keep doing what you're doing. That's number one. And number two, help us address the risks that have to be managed by either party, the way you've done in the past with the advice you gave us. I think we worked well together to do things more efficiently and in keeping with higher standards. It's important to support projects when they need it, and then hand them over to other investors who may be more comfortable with that, bring us more investors like Allianz, and then also try to identify the risks to be managed. We have a huge challenge with the long construction periods. It's not just 2 or 3 years, it goes up to 9, and that represents additional risks. So the risks are there, but we do have opportunities to do things even better than we're doing them now.
Business model as we scale up is to work to do more upstream, to create the enabling environment so that when we come in and do transactions, that it will be successful and also more easily implemented, because those early projects are not just about the construction itself, but it's all the regulatory work and ESG work that really has to go around that. So I think your comment on advice is appreciated. Let's now turn to Marta.
Okay, I'll go fast. I'll give you a challenge. I mean, I think you guys were key for us and for our success in Latin America. We wouldn't be where we are if we wouldn't have been for the IDB. But as I listed all my countries, they all have something in common. They're all investment grade. So now we have to go together and we have to figure out the second tier of countries, those that they are no investment grade, the Paraguays or Ecuador. And I think that's something where we probably can thrive together.
I appreciate that. Okay, Jan.
Sure. So I think for me, it's really what's been key is I think when we are impact investor, we invest in the private assets, and so what is really key are the relationships on the ground and the ecosystems that you have creating there. So really working with you on transactions, benefiting, sort of leveraging from your local presence in the different countries. I think that would be, for me, key in the continuation.
I love the comment of actually ecosystems, because it's partnerships and it's also ecosystems, because we've learned we can't do this on our own. And even, as we talked about before, I think with us on the stage, it's also everybody on the ground. And I think as we look at the new model, this work on the ground, and we've talked about this before, the importance of the presence on the ground and not just the occasional trip there, but really understanding and helping and solving and having the relationships on the ground, and that's part of the new model. And let's turn to Julian, if you'll bring us home, please.
Sure. Well, on the two sides, asset creation and asset distribution, I think on the asset creation side, there is, I guess, a fair amount of coming with the curve the local markets need to have to ensure that we provide more product to you. To understand how it is that we can tick these boxes a little bit quicker, because we do make an assumption that work with NEVs does take a lot of time and is extremely invasive. Understanding how you can play a part in transactions that are more market-driven and working on a different time scale, working along the time scale of the actual need of the borrower that may be more compressed. I think that's a communication thing, and that's therefore fairly easy to solve. We'll have to have some dialogue in relation to how does this actually tick those boxes, which may not be as obviously satisfied, and understanding therefore what criteria IDB Invest would have appetite in. We do see a lot of deal flow, and as I said, in any other territories in which we are, there are different nuances that can impact executability. Having a party that is uncorrelated to that is a useful component, and therefore, once we complete the discussions, I think the flow side will be cured. On the demand side, as far as local players playing a larger role in taking up some of the distribution of the assets and deals that you're a part of, the fact that you work along with a principle of market-based pricing. And therefore, to the extent that the market players are there and they're looking, of course, on a transaction that would have gone through a deep amount of diligence, then I think it does tick the box in the same way it tips it for Rodrigo, it ticks it for Jan, it also ticks it for Marta. That these are the kind of credits that we'd be willing to expose ourselves to, and it's within a pricing range that falls within what we'd be targeting anyway. I don't see that we have to do much work there other than because investors naturally would want it. Other than in some of the territories, there are restrictions that will limit the ability of players to play. So in some territories, you have concentration issues with regard to currency, with regard to single issues, with regard to industries, with regard to secured or unsecured. These are nuances that are country specific. And when you navigate, and we have some countries that actually have currency restrictions completely, right? That causes quite a bit of distortion. I think within the region, to genuinely get full regional participation rather than isolated regional participation, we do need to look at what are those limiting factors, and IDBs with the halo effect is a perfect player to have at the table, to have those discussions, because the money does wish to express itself, and the credit work you guys do certainly helps to open the door for the investors to get comfort to participate. So I think we're on a good footing already, and there's a lot more to come as we get to see how we can flow deals into IDB Invest in a more efficient way as a part of our normal distribution process that's active in the markets.
I can't wait to see what's next. I think we've had a great conversation about products, about impact, about how to work with IDB Invest, and also early conversations about our new business model and originate-to-share. So I want to thank you for your partnership. I want to thank you for your participation in this panel. So I would ask the audience to please join me with a warm round of applause for the panelists.
Gracias a nuestros panelistas.
Thank you to the panelists for being with us for this first panel. Let's give them a round of applause, please. And we invite you to leave the stage as we welcome the next panel. At this time, we invite you to exit the stage. And thank you for everything you shared with us this afternoon. Thank you for being with us. Let's continue. Once again, this seminar is made up of two panels and moving to yet another very interesting topic, innovating to mobilize. And to do just that, we are going to invite Marcelo Cabral, who's the Chief of Scalability, Knowledge, and Impact at IDB Lab, as well as the panelists who will be with him. And we'd like to ask for a hand for them as well.
Ay, gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We know that this is the end of not just today, but a two-day event. So let's start by thanking you for being here, and I hope that this conversation is insightful for all of you. I know that the true survivors of the work we do are you, the audience. It falls on me to start with an introduction, and I would like to do that with an alarming fact, and that is that 25% of the Millennium Goals are going to be achieved in 2030 and no more. And that's key when we think about poverty, education, cities, and climate change, only 25%. And you're wondering why I'm starting with this. And I'm starting with this because we believe that innovation, from a venture perspective, can really boost and accelerate the achievement of these goals. So doing more of the same is important, but also doing different is important. When we work with all of the partners I'm going to present to you shortly, we understand that in addition to these partners, we're to work with a lot more. And so it's not about any one partner. Lastly, just a few numbers, and these are the concerning ones, and this is why we have this title for our panel. And it is that in 2021 and 2023, during that period, the capital for venture innovation was $6 billion, and it dropped to $4 billion. And of that, only 80% was concentrated in just a few sectors, not necessarily related to the Millennium Goals, and 60% in a few countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so the idea of originate to share, innovate to share is really important for us. What we have been discussing with our partners is what we can do so that new mobilization strategies make it possible to achieve the Millennium Goals, step up financing, and actually bring them to places where they make a difference. That's the work we have cut out for us during this panel. And that's basically our bread and butter at IDB Lab. Now I can share a public service announcement. Here we are currently going through a transition at IDB Lab. We are trying to find the levers to increase our financing, increase our knowledge, and also increase the number of connections we had to achieve that. And so the time for this conversation is now. And this is a time to discuss how we can innovate to mobilize and how we can truly make a difference. If I may, I would like to present our panelists. You have them here on the screen as well, but we have Luisa Fernanda Cadavid Reyes, who is the director of the unit of business strengthening at the Chamber of Commerce in Cali, Colombia. And I will ask for a hand for each of our panelists, please. We also have Camila Petignat, who's a partner at IDB Lab from Yield Lab Latam and one of our partners, as Fernanda. Katsura Miyazaki, who is a senior vice president of JICA, the International Cooperation Agency of Japan, and a major partner for us, so thank you very much for being with us. I see that you're quick learners, so thank you very much. And last but not least, we have Manuel Reyes Rotana, who is the regional director at the IFC, at the World Bank Group, and so thank you very much for being with us. Very well. I would like to begin in Cali. Nanda? For us, on the corporate side, but also on the startup side, one of the vital things we wonder is how can the private sector play a bigger role in innovating and disrupting. And so my question is, from the perspective of the Chamber of Commerce, from what we're doing, what can be done and continue to be done, and what can be done differently in order to increase the purpose and goals and actually achieve the Millennium Goals? Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who is still with us at this time. I do want to take some time to give you the context of Cali. There are a lot of regions in Colombia, which means that there are many challenges for a city that isn't the capital. When we have partners like IDB Lab, we realize that's absolutely necessary because cooperation continues to flow to capitals in Latin America. And we need partners like the IDB Lab to join us as we take on this challenge. And we firmly believe that the private sector is the answer to a lot of these millennium challenges. Cali has a population of 4 million. 1 in 4 residents lives in poverty. Our women, we continue to face significant gaps. 68% of micro businesses has a low productivity and they're women-led. But when we move to high-impact entrepreneurship, women only account for 20%. But what's the good side of the story? We produce 35% of agribusiness in the country. In Camila, just giving you that so you can bring that to COP16. And we only account for 2% of our landmass. Our exports are the most diverse and sophisticated in the country, which means that we do have what it takes. But we're also a city with a population of 4 million, but I have the privilege of always falling asleep with the over 100 different frogs that I hear every night and the 300 different bird species that we have. We are a biodiverse region, but we cannot talk about biodiversity, but rather talk about diversity. This is why I mentioned that we have the most diverse and sophisticated exports in the country. What does that mean? It means that the incredible power that we have is a transformative one. We believe in competitiveness, but always seeking a positive social and environmental impact. This is something that we have put to the test with IDB Lab in different projects. I love using examples because that is where we can help materialize the ideas that we start discussing at our desks. We had a project when we provided support to 1,200 different hair salons. As you know, in our countries in Latin America, hair salons are a traditional kind of of business, mainly women run, few resources, low productivity, and so there are a lot of challenges when it comes to providing support. And all of a sudden, we get an entrepreneur who shows up with an innovative idea. They created an app in which every hair salon can register. They negotiate with the major brands, which means that hair salons are already buying at prices that benefit from economies of scale. And in addition to that, they get support, but also, and listen to this, they get data. And so hair salons right now in Cali have data that allows them to see when they're going to run out of products, or that lady whose hair is going to start graying again and they need that product, and to reach out to her to schedule that visit to the salon. And that is the innovation part of that. And that is how we can address these challenges. And so with that, thank you very much, IDB Lab, for the invitation, but also thank you for being our partner and for having your early stage risk appetite, which is very difficult to find. Well, second question, is this scalable? Yes. So 1,000 hair salons can become thousands of hair salons. And do you think that's possible? Just 1 minute to answer that. Well, you know what? I am fully convinced that it is. We need to remember that these local projects who get very rigorous measuring can be scaled. And how does that happen? We had another example. I hope that we have an opportunity to talk about this later. This had to do with making micro businesses formal. And now this is an item that has become a national item, that has become part of regulation. And again, we do very rigorous monitoring of these different businesses. We see exactly what worked and what didn't work. And we're always looking for the other partners that are willing to come in and scale up those efforts. And so, yes, it is scalable. Thank you very much. Camila, I have an even harder question for you. We talked about 16 billion down to 4 billion. And we also talked about the important role of venture capital. In your experience, can mobilization stabilize? Can it be enhanced? Can it be used to have a bigger impact? Great, thank you very much. And once again, thank you for having me here, and thank you all for being here, especially so late in the day. Before I answer that question, just want to tell you a little bit about our organization. I represent IDB Lab Latam. This is a venture capital fund that specializes in agri-food tech. We invest in the Latin American office, and we only invest in Latin America, which means that we are a niche of a niche, because it is a highly specific operation in a sector that for venture capital may not be as sexy, perhaps, as others, but it is one that has a lot of different impact dimensions. As I was just telling my fellow panelists, we started transforming into an investment, an impact investing operation. And we know that there's always a drive to change business as usual within this industry. And this means that things are always improving, and that has a huge impact in rural areas, on education, financial side, the production side, the climate side, and through innovation. And so it is a sector that has a number of different value layers. We started investing in 2018. We are what is called a first-time manager. And during that time period, Marcelo was just discussing, we went from an assets under management of 6 million up to 50 million, which has gone completely against the trend that we've seen. We can say that there was a bit of luck in there, but really part of luck was being in the right place at the right time and working with the right partners. When we started to build this fund, that was in 2021, 2022, we applied, placed a bid when there was a call for bids from IDB Lab, looking for these investment managers with a specific edge, and we were selected out of 250 different managers. Our due diligence process was super extensive, as you can only imagine. And I think over the course of about 10 months, we were able to get $4 million committed by IDB Lab. That completely changed the game for us. From then on, we started to engage with institutional investors with long investment histories. These were funds for funds or funds for corporate impact with their own corporate venture capital. And I remember a specific conversation I had, and that was with someone from a CPG that were also investing in us. And they were saying, well, if the due diligence that you did got support from the IDB, we're in. Nothing else to discuss. So we entered into this paradigm where we are shedding that skin of first-time managers. And that first door that was open, being able to go through it to get to the $4 million in IDB Lab commitment, that started to open other doors, higher mobilization, higher capital allocation for funds. And recently that closed with the Jeff approval, that is the global environmental facility. And again, the only way to get that commitment was thanks to our work with IDB Lab. And that's for several reasons. One is because that is the window we turn to in order to get to this other institution. And also because that was a process that took a year of building a framework for impact, for reporting, for tracking metrics, in order to bring potential investors and investments that we wanted to make into that ecosystem for the environment and for industry, and bring them up to the standards and the expectations that Jeff had. Fortunately, and very luckily for us, that brought us even closer to our goal, which is to have a $50 million fund that we're going to be closing in a few months. And so we're almost there. But the only way that was all possible, on the one hand, was to have having the right partner, IDB Lab, which is the top investor in Latin America for these kinds of projects, and it has been the case historically, and that opens a lot of doors. And on the other side, it's making sure that it was the right time, and the fact that we had a value proposition that was very specific for the kinds of funds that needed allocation. These were the funds that seek to have an impact in Latin America and leading to a financial transformation in the region. And as we always say, the only economic sector with this degree of potential and so many dimensions of value is agri-foods. Environmental, social, education, economic, climate. And so we're thrilled to have been able to leverage all of those partnerships and to be in a stage when we are rolling out that fund, and we have a lot more to do. I have another question for you. This will be for later, but perhaps this is homework for you. But what could we have done better as IDB Lab? I would love to hear your recommendations to understand how to be even better partners. So thank you for the initial endorsement too. Katsura.
You traveled the longest to be here, and we really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you very much.
So we've been talking about financing quite a bit. Let's move now, or add, the issue of knowledge and connections.
Yeah.
So JICA has been a great partner with a great belief, and the belief was essentially that we can connect at the global level, startups, innovations, and entrepreneurial. What can we do better? And what have you done in terms of connecting with us that really has made a difference for you as a partner?
Okay, thank you very much, Marcelo. My name is Miyazaki. I'm from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, and JICA is the development agency for implementing the international cooperation under the government of Japan. And we have the more than 50 years have the activities in Latin American and the Caribbean regions. And we have the 23 offices in the LAC region. And yes, we now need innovation because we are facing multiple crises such as the infectious disease, climate change, and natural disasters, and also the conflicts. And so the innovation and the ecosystem for the creating and innovation is truly important, I think. And JICA is a bilateral organization. That is the strong point for us. Not necessarily I want to emphasize Japan, and I want to emphasize a bilateral organization that is different from the IDB or the IFC. So I mean that we have the very strong connection with the Japanese startups or Japanese company. So we need some new chemical reactions with between the several among several actors, and we invite Japanese startup, and together with IDB Lab, we started Tsubasa. Tsubasa means in Japanese wing, to fly. And that is the support program for Japanese startups, and launched in 2021. And we have that strong network and connection with Japanese startups, and IDB Lab has the strong connection in the region and trust. So that together with the two organizations, we can create a chemical reaction and also the synergy. So that is very important for us. Very simple. The multilateral organizations such as IDB and the bilateral organizations such as JICA together, and very simple, but to emphasize enhance the innovation for the Japanese startups. That is I think one of the very important, and that we are now doing together with IDB Lab.
Great.
Yeah.
So this is the question for you, another question.
Yeah.
What a startup from Japan would look in terms of partnerships with potential startups or innovation systems in Latin America? What are the main issues, or what are the main challenges that they have?
Yes, Japanese startups are accustomed to work in the very stable and the low growth areas such as Japan and the other Asia region compared with the Latin America. And the startups or Japanese company tend to start the business with the high specification, too much specification sometimes, and very detailed. But sometimes countries in Latin American region needs more simpler and very clear-cut technology and modality. So we, JICA, can connect with the Japanese startups to guide them to how their business can be manageable in LAC region. And then after the selecting the startups, the Tsubasa program, together with the IDB Lab, IDB can support to select a country the Japanese startups would like to work, what has a potential. And that kind of the collaboration is very useful for the challenge of the Japanese startups. Am I answering your question?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katsura.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you in a moment, but Manuel, you're next. Voy a pasar de nuevo a español.
And this will be in Spanish, Manuel. So, Manuel, obviously what we have been talking about doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are conversations happening at a very high level around how to continue improving the work of MDBs. There are conversations between the World Bank Group and the IDB Group to deepen that cooperation, and that is on the agenda. The idea of innovating to mobilize. I'm wondering if you can talk to us and give us your perspective of how this can be done better as MDBs, and what are the different proposals or examples that we should be putting on the table. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to share insights here at this forum. I think that the advantage of being the last one here is that I can actually build my answer based on what has already been said, and so thank you all. Yes, the last shall be the first, as they say. Well, yes, there's a lot of demand for MDBs to get organized. The years of competition are now behind us, and that is because there isn't enough capital to meet all of the development needs in our region. You mentioned that there are discussions happening at high levels. The World Bank Group and the IDB Group signed an MOU to work on three major topics that are very important for the region: is the Amazon, digitalization, and the Caribbean. And it's not just about co-investing or mobilizing. It's not a transactional relationship. This is an opportunity so that through our cooperation, we can take on these systemic issues facing the region and facing countries. In the specific examples of startups and innovation, and if I can build on what has already been said, there are very clear challenges that we can take on from different angles, like scalability, for example. This is something you mentioned, Miyazaki, also being able to take on major challenges by taking smaller steps, just by focusing on cost effectiveness. Camila, something you said that was very interesting too was the growth trends for the fund that you work for and the trends in the region. And so the question is, can we find the factors that allow this fund in particular to have a trend that goes the other way from what's seen in the market, and how can we replicate that? How can we leverage that knowledge to benefit other funds in the region? Also, looking at the experiences in other regions and other countries, there was a question that you were asking Miyazaki, and it had to do with how to make connections at a global level and how to compare the environment that entrepreneurs have in Japan compared to Latin America. We have three examples. I've seen three different platforms that we have been using, and they are either regional or multi-regional in nature. IFC Startup Catalyst, Global Ventures, and Scale X program. They have different features, they target different markets. But they have given us a certain degree of replicability that has helped increase volume. That said, there's still a major opportunity to develop a way to address the systemic issues, and that requires replicating this experience throughout the entire region. And this is where I think your question hits this right on the head, at how to work together to take on these challenges and not simply throw money at the problem. How to work intelligently so that we can create a self-sustaining ecosystem. We've been talking about systemic problems and the fact that there are too many problems. That's one issue. We also know that there is very little known about systemic issues that can be found from one region to the next that require a global solution. And so, would you agree in saying that we have too many problems and many times we have a problem focusing on the right ones? You say yes. And now, next question. So the challenges in Africa and in Asia and these solutions, can they be brought into Latin America and the Caribbean? What's the best way to do that? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. I think that in some ecosystems there are some similarities. Sure, I know we have many challenges. Yes, but let's speak regulations. And some that we find in a number of different regions. We see a need to develop and to ensure that regulatory environments evolve so that entrepreneurs can actually start businesses and actually take on this task. And so that's a problem that isn't regional, it's global. Another issue has to do with access to capital. The panelists before the start of this panel and I were discussing the amount of capital available and how many projects need capital. And that disconnect between these two realities, what's missing in the middle? That's not a problem exclusive to Latin America. We see that in South Asia, in Africa, in Eastern Europe. There's something there in the middle that needs to be addressed, and it has to do with the knowledge and creating the kind of environment that makes it easier for entrepreneurs to do that work. I think those are the two main ones. The third one, and this can look different depending on where you are, what country, what region, and it has to do with potentially political, social, economic volatility. And that can also impact an entrepreneur's ability to start a business, to innovate, and to grow. Of course, every region faces its own challenges, but we have found that there is a common denominator. Great, thank you very much, Manuel.
When I ask about other regions and learning from other regions, and JICA has a global reach. So I would love for you to share with us some of the things that you've seen in other regions that you might see applicable to Latin America and the Caribbean, or the other way around, so we can learn about that kind of exchange.
Yes. Yes. We are doing the projects in the world, and we have the 20 strategies by each sector, and before we are concentrating the operation on each country, but these days we have noticed that it is not enough to enhance our impact. How we how can I say involve the whole world to solve the similar problems. And we are now thinking to if we do some project in Asia, for example, and some challenges exist, and we apply these challenges and revise it to the other regions. That kind of how can I say, reaction has not existed before. But these days, we are doing such kind of not necessarily in the region, in global approach, what we JICA call a global agenda. That is one of the challenge we are doing. But only one problem is how it is very difficult to measure the impact of each global agenda. So now we are, how can I say, considering how we measure and how we set the indicator. That is the key to apply to the one country's or one region's result to apply to other region and globally. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I mean, the issue of impact and impact measurement and how to do it at a global level, especially talking about global goods, global public goods, which is something that we're also trying to push from the side of innovation for the rest of the IDB Group. And we have that challenges. So we should talk at this point after the panel.
Okay.
Camila, te di un deber.
I assigned you some homework, so let me come back to that. What can we do better? And if you have any comments about the other questions, I'm going to piggyback on what Manuel said. Again, connecting it with what I said at the outset. Why are we special? I think that we are playing a role as an intermediator, because we still have many connections to make. And I think creating a context is not all that easy to measure. You can't charge for that. You can't make money by doing that. So when you say creating context, what do you mean? Well, it's like generating a context, fostering conversations, networking, but connecting them systemically, not transactionally. We're trying to create spaces where conversations can happen, and we're not limited to mainstream conversations. And we've done that from the very beginning. some of the founding members were entrepreneurs, and we were working in ag tech before it was well known. It wasn't. Back in 2010, there was no spotlight on ag tech. The concept did not exist. So we were like the Lone Ranger, is what we say in Argentina. The entrepreneur has to do everything. We had to educate investors. We had to educate our lawyers so that they could help us develop the investment instruments we needed. We had to develop our products. So we had to do everything, also connect with the ecosystem. When we began to invest in 2018, we would say we need to have an ecosystem that supports the investor. And that ecosystem, that context, which connects projects, startups, people in the field, and capital, which is up here. So that's where IDB Lab comes in. It helps us create that type of context. Obviously, it could be more streamlined, and we can say that about any multilateral organization, but it does perform an important role. And it is one of the ecosystem facilitators in Latin America. So we need IDB Invest to be more nimble, but we also need other players to come in. We need the corporates, we need companies, businesses in the sector. The only other player is the IDB. So what could the IDB do is help more traditional companies in the sector, in the region. We have major players in the food sector in the region. So get them on board with innovation. I always am leery of big words. I don't like hub, I don't like systemic, because I'm not sure what they mean. So I think it's important to define what you mean so that we can all be on the same page. So, Menda, you were saying yes when we said it should be systemic. A Chamber of Commerce does that. It does make for systemic change. Well, you could say that we connect private sector, cooperation, and the public sector. Private sector and public sector. So we're the hinge. These are huge problems. Poverty, inequality, climate change. Where do you even begin to propose a solution? You can't approach this unless you do it systemically. I understand that a young person in Cali not able to find a job, this is something for the education sector. Our young people, or rather, it's education and health, they can't perform on tests because they don't have normal muscle mass and they don't have the education. So that's a public policy issue. What does the private sector have to do with this, especially venture capital? It seems to be far from the conversation, at least that's my impression. What I would say is that if you start out from a public policy standpoint, it's too much. We think that the solutions have to be bottom up. So if you take one of these issues, for example, what we were talking about a few minutes ago, formalization. In Colombia, it's been 30 years. We've had formal business rates of 30-some%, barely. I don't remember the exact numbers, but what did we do? The private sector decided to address this as a marketing, as a competition issue. Why were they not formalizing their companies? Well, because they could work under better conditions. So we were able to understand why those small companies were not willing to join the formal sector, and we decided to work with something we call the minimum effective dose. In order to scale this up, from the private sector standpoint, we have to be efficient. And we've been going back and forth. Either we have very deep programs and we have companies grow fast, but then it's too expensive, and then we swing to the other extreme and we have many companies, and I forgot the word I was going to use, and by having so many companies, we lose depth, and so we again swing back to having fewer companies. We need to be obsessed with scalability, otherwise we're not going to find the sweet spot, which is the minimum efficient dose. And we have to do that based on a very deep knowledge of how the private sector works. Then you can have your numbers, you can have your evidence, and move to a public policy level. But starting at the top, when you have a multi-factor problem, is very difficult. Manuel, I was looking at you. Before you speak, well, Luisa and Camila's comments were very interesting. Should I ask you a question, or do you just want to go? No, what Camila was saying is essential. It has to become an environment. The context has to become an environment. And one player cannot cover it all. So what is very important is for us to figure out how we can mobilize multilaterals, development organizations, bilateral organizations like JICA, to mobilize players and create a setting that makes it possible to replicate and scale up without having to solve the same problems many times. That's where we get stuck. Instead of having an enabling environment where the problem is no longer a problem, we keep doing the same thing over and over. That, I think, is where we need to start. I think I'm understanding the word hub a little better. We said that venture capital in Latin America and the Caribbean was only present in a few sectors. Maybe it's the sectors that most need investment, where there's a higher return, yes, but also where there's more need in terms of meeting the SDGs. So why is it that it's harder to invest in those sectors, and what can we do about it? 3 minutes. That's a very good question. I think that it's a combination of factors. One is knowledge. The sectors that have the highest impact are maybe more difficult sectors because there's a correlation between the ease of operating in a sector and the impact it can have. For example, consumer goods in a region like Latin America with a relatively young and growing population. I would venture to say that it's a done deal. Trading in consumer goods, clothing. Then you have businesses like the ones Camila invests in, the agri-food industry, where you have to innovate. It's a niche within a niche. Because it's tougher, you need to know more, you need to be both an entrepreneur and an innovator. So I see the two ends of a spectrum. You need to find the investments that are going to have a strong development impact and where we can add value, provide something that companies are not going to find easily in their environment. So I think that's what makes those projects more difficult to pull off. Trade does generate wealth, but buying and selling goods in general terms does not have the same impact as a new technology, an innovation, a new approach that makes it possible to solve a problem in climate change, nutrition, education. So I think we need to find that correlation. It is what warrants using development resources like IDB Invest and IDB Lab to tackle these problems where it's harder to get results. We have 3 minutes and 45 seconds, so under 4 minutes. And if I keep on talking, it's going to be even less than that. So the question is, before we came up here, we promised to try to learn something. So the challenge is for you to tell me in 1 minute what you learned from this conversation. I know it's hard to do, but I would love to get that from you. Amanda, you want to go first? Are you volunteering? Well, what I learned, and first of all, thank you to our panel member from JICA. Her important message for me was having trust, trusting an institution like IDB Lab, and that trust is essential to work in an investor ecosystem. It makes it possible to bring all the other players together and having them operate within one system. Thank you for that. Camila, for me, it's interesting to hear from organizations like the IFC or IDB Lab, where even though they're doing good things, they continue to explore how they can do better, how they can evolve. We would tend to think that they're well-established institutions, and even so, they still see a role for innovation. And I think that is a new mindset that is here to stay. It's not just innovating in technology. Innovation is not limited to a technique. It's a mindset. So it's important for us to all rethink what we need to do to make all this happen. And this means going beyond my job description or even my organization. And the new business models that we're starting to see, I think, are important. I found that to be interesting.
And a lot. I noticed that very important issues regarding there is a very difficult sectors and not necessarily not easy, but less difficult sectors, and we have to select and focus because our resources are very limited. So I have to learn a lot, and also I am in charge now of the Latin American region, but we have a lot to learn from other regions. So I have to make an effort to collect the information from the other regions also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katsura. Very appreciated. Manuel, un minuto.
Manuel, you have 1 minute. What I take away from this conversation is having realized that combining different visions, different experiences is essential if we're going to innovate. And hearing from Camila, Amanda, and Katsura, I've been able to see things that is hard for us to see from our corner, from where we stand. And the same thing I'm sure happens with IDB Lab. If we don't have a 360 view, it's going to be very hard to understand all of the angles that are important to do what Camila said before. How do you create a context, a setting that becomes an environment? And so that we don't have to correct the same mistakes over and over. I think that's it. We finished. We had 6 seconds left, so that ends it for us.
Nanda, por estar aquí, por la conversación.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for this conversation and for helping us learn.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas
Thank you very much to our panelists for being here today. Please, a round of applause once again. Thank you, and thank you to our audience, those who've been here all day, attending the seminars. I'm sure you've learned a great deal, and we do feel very grateful to you for having joined us. So there's more tomorrow. We will look forward to seeing you here at 9 a.m. for the Business Forum. See you tomorrow and wish you a very good evening.